This is a video about an exam walkthrough, and this is from the exam paper for February 2018. This is question 1A. Claire is a designer for a games development company. She works from home and in public places such as cafes, train stations and airports. Claire uses her laptop to prepare designs. So again, we need to make sure that we consider the actual scenario when answering the question. And in this particular case, the key information is that she works from home and in public places. It says, give 2 ways Claire could connect her laptop to the internet when she is working away from home. So you need to consider, how can we connect to the internet in a public place? So in other words, not using your normal router in your house. Have a little go, answer the question. Remember, it is a give question, so we don't have to write big explanations, just a short, simple answer. This is the mark scheme for question 1A. It says that you can have any 2 of the following. So in this particular case, we are allowed to have an open Wi-Fi network. So if you are in a cafe, a train station or an airport, they often have open Wi-Fi networks that you can connect to. You could put something to do with tethering, using her phone to connect to the laptop to set up a personal hotspot. Or you could just put mobile device as the internet connection. In other words, you can have tethering, open Wi-Fi or mobile internet. Question 1B says Claire uses cloud storage for her designs. One benefit to Claire of using cloud storage is that she can access her designs anywhere that has internet access. State 2 other benefits to Claire of using cloud storage. So it's already given us one benefit, which is that you can access your files anywhere. You need to think about other benefits of cloud storage. So have a little think about that and answer your question. Remember, it says state, so we don't need any sort of written explanation. For question 1C, it says Claire is concerned about malware. She knows a virus is a type of malware. Give 2 other types of malware. So you need to think about malware, malicious software, and think about the other types that are classified as malware. You should have been taught about 4 or 5 of these, so it shouldn't be too difficult to think of them. Have a little go at answering these questions and we'll go through the answers. So this is the mark scheme for question 1B and C. For question 1B, for the benefits of cloud storage, you're allowed to say anything about automatic backup, synchronization across devices, cloud service providers adding extra security, and that you can invite people to view the folders or files. It says you can accept any other appropriate response. So as long as you haven't put something to do with accessing anywhere, then you can get the marks. The most common marks that you would put, or the most common statements that people put in, would probably be an automatic backup and extra security. For question 1C, the types of malware that you can put down are worms, Trojan, botnet, ransomware, rootkit and spyware. It does say accept any other appropriate response, so if there's anything that you've put in that isn't on that list, you might get lucky and get a mark for that as well. Question 1D. Claire has recently been a victim of phishing. Describe one way that this could have happened. So on every exam paper you usually have a describe question. This one's come a little bit earlier than usual in terms of the pattern of the exam papers. If you don't know what phishing is, then this question becomes very difficult to answer. So this is one of those questions where, you've kind of given yourself no chance if you don't know what phishing is. But by the time you sit this exam, you should at least have a rough idea of what this is. So for this question, you've got to describe one way that this could have happened. So you need to describe possible ways that phishing can take place. So have a little think about it, try and answer the question, and obviously you will see the answers in a moment. For question 1E, it says the laptop's been infected with a virus. Explain 2 ways that Claire's laptop could have been infected with a virus. So there's 2 different ways that you need to explain how you could have actually got that virus. Now this takes a little bit of thought. It's not the easiest question in the world. You need to really think about how you could actually get the virus in the first place. Once you've identified that, then try to explain in a full sentence how that could have taken place. Give yourself a chance to answer this question, and we'll go through the answers now. That will be the end of question 1. So for question 1D, it said, describe one way that this could have happened. How can a phishing attack take place? The mark scheme says that you can talk about receiving an email asking for personal details, or that you've clicked on a link in an email that you've received, or that you've provided personal information. So in other words, any sort of phishing attack, whether it's an email and you've given them personal information, or if it's a phone call and you've given them personal information, text message or social media post, anything to do with how phishing attacks normally take place, and then an explanation of exactly what they've given. So what have they given away on the phishing attack? For question 1E, it said 2 ways that you could have been infected with a virus. So the ways that you're looking for really are using a portable device, using an unencrypted network, downloading a file from the internet, or clicked on an email attachment. So any of those methods with an explanation. For example, if you click on an email attachment and then that downloads the virus onto your computer, or if you shared a device with somebody else like a USB stick, memory stick, then you could have installed that virus onto your computer. So at this point, you should have thought about how many marks you've got out of 12 on question 1. If you've marked through your questions, you should know what you've got out of 12, and we are starting on question 2. So question 2 says a local travel agency sells holidays through high street shops and online. The travel agency currently uses biometrics to secure its computer systems. Give 2 other ways the travel agency can restrict user access. So this is all about protecting data, but it's from a restricting access point of view. So it's not, protecting data, it's completely restricting the user access. In other words, stopping the user from even getting onto the system in the first place. So if it says biometrics is one example, you need to pick a different method. Biometrics is obviously where you use some sort of scan of your body, whether it's your iris or your fingerprint, which is probably the most common. That is how they normally gain access to the computers. You need to think of 2 other ways. No explanation needed, just identify what they are. Question 2B says there's been a security breach of customers' data. Explain one impact the security breach might have on the travel agency. So you need to think about when things go wrong for a company, when data has been leaked, what kind of things can happen to that actual travel agency, what could be something that happens to them. I think it should be fairly easy, common sense, to think of at least one impact and then give a full explanation. So take your time on these questions, try your best to answer them, and we'll go through the answers in a moment. Okay, so the mark scheme for 2A says that we're allowed to have anything to do with passwords, username and passwords, 2-factor authentication, set levels of permitted access or user access levels, and physical security, in other words locks or keycards. does say accept any other appropriate response, but a lot of the answers that people put in are usually things like antivirus and firewall, but that isn't restricting access, that is protecting the data from external attacks. There's a difference. So user access means that you're literally stopping them from gaining entry to the systems in the first place. For 2B, the impacts that you can talk about are usually going to be something to do with reputation. So in this case it says damage public image, and then an explanation, the reputation is damaged or the public image is damaged because people might look at them and think, I'm not going to use that company anymore, and therefore they get less customers. You could talk about loss of data. So obviously this is a pretty obvious one. If you've had a security breach, then you're going to lose data. You could have legal action taken against you. In other words, you could be sued by the customers. And another impact is that you would lose customers, and that's because of the things that we've previously said. Okay, so this is 2C. This is one of those questions that pops up on every paper where it's some sort of image and we have to do an annotation. So these vary really, where sometimes you have to annotate two things and write a written explanation. On this particular one, it just says to annotate the form to show what the improvements are. So we don't need to do a full written explanation, just to kind of highlight what things we could improve. Sometimes you get asked to add things to the system. In this one is talking about 4 improvements, and in this case it just says user friendly and effective, so it doesn't necessarily need to be for inclusivity or accessibility, just in general, how can we make it more user friendly. So easiest thing to do is to look over the actual form that's already there, take note of what the actual information is that's being included in the form, and then also think about things that aren't actually there that you could maybe add in as extra features. So have a little think about it, and then we'll go through and talk about the things that you could add in. Okay, so your annotations could look something like this, where you point an arrow to something that's on the form or circle something that's on the form, and then just label what your annotation actually is. So for example, the heading was really small text that people might have struggled to see, so you could just point an arrow to that and say large text for the heading. Where it says the region, you could say that we're going to add a drop down box for the different regions to allow you to choose. What that means is that you could click a drop down box and choose northwest, northeast, south, London area, whichever region it is that you want to click on. Where it says departure date, you could put in a calendar that people could click on and then choose the actual correct date. For length of stay, you could put spin buttons, so it could just be that you start on 0 and you can change between 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, whichever how many days you want to stay. For number of guests, again, you could do something similar. You could have a drop down box where you choose 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and so on. Number of rooms could also be the same. We could also add a search option into the form. We could even add some navigation, as in arrows to go between the different pages. And we can also add some accessibility options, for example, a text to speech. You could also have some sort of magnifier so that you could zoom in. So if you ever get a question where it talks about making improvements to an interface, often if you read the question really carefully, and it definitely says for you to suggest improvements, and you could put in a text to speech and you could put in a magnifier or a search feature, and it's almost like a cheat code for anything that where it's talking about improvements. The same thing goes for calendars if there's any dates that they need to put in, and drop down boxes if there's any input boxes that need to be filled in. Question 2D. The travel agency has an acceptable use policy. Explain two purposes of this policy. So this is a difficult question if you don't know what an acceptable use policy is. On the other walkthrough for the exam there's a similar question, but it gives you an example of what might be included. This is one of those things where if you try to keep positive in the exam, and if you're a bit unsure, just leave this question out and come back to it. But when you see that word acceptable use, you just have to think about what that might mean. So we should know that a policy, because there's various different policies that we can have in the real world, and a policy is just a list of rules that you're allowed to follow, that you have to follow. An acceptable use policy is what is acceptable when using things. So in the travel agency, what type of things would they have to say what you are and not allowed to do when you're using the IT systems? So what is two purposes of this policy? What are they trying to do? And then an explanation for each one. So what is the acceptable use policy? What is it trying to do? What is it there for? Explain two different reasons and why for each one. So this is the mark scheme for 2D. The different explanations could cover things like what items are covered, so what items are listed in the actual policy, so in this case hardware and documents, and what they should be, how they should be treated. You could cover how staff need to be aware of how they should behave and what they shouldn't do when dealing with staff and customers. And you could also put that all staff need to agree to it so that they are clear of what sanctions are in place, and maybe so that the company can monitor the staff and give reprimands or some sort of sanction if anything goes wrong. So the most common answer for this was to tell people what they can and can't do with the systems, which is essentially the second bullet point, how they should behave. And then a lot of people struggle to come up with another purpose. So when you get to a point where you're really struggling for a second answer, just think about what you actually know about an acceptable use policy. So you're like, well, what is it? What's the point of it? Why do we have them? You want to make sure that people aren't doing something wrong, and if they do, they're punished. So if you think about that and then put that in as an answer, then you've got a really good chance of getting a mark. And as it happens, it does say here that sanctions can be put in place if any agreement is breached. So you would have got the marks if you'd have just thought on your feet a little bit and thought, what is the actual purpose of having one of these policies? Question 3. So at this point you should have now checked your marks for question 2, and you should have a running total of how many marks you're up to. For this particular question we're onto a new scenario. It says that Piccadilly Shoes sells shoes through its nationwide shops and telephone orders. The company records transactional data from all sales. Explain one way that Piccadilly Shoes should use this data. So for this we need to know what transactional data is. Transactional data is when data is recorded about the exchange of money or goods. In other words, how many items have been purchased and how much did they cost, and what is the running total of money required to actually complete the transaction. So think about how they could use the transactional data. Okay, and for 3B, staff from different shops work together to produce reports about the company's sales. Explain two collaboration tools that can be used to help staff work together on these reports. So if you break the question down again, it says that different shops are working together to produce reports. So what are two different tools that they could use to help them work together? Think about what the tool would be and then do a written explanation. Collaboration tool just means that any technology that helps us work together. So think about that. How could they use certain tools and what is the explanation? So this is the mark scheme for 3A and 3B. It says that one of the explanations you can talk about is personalized marketing. So if people are buying items, you could suggest possible improvements or possible new products based on their purchase history. And you could also use it for stock control, or what's not listed here, you could talk about financial analysis, because if you're tracking all transactional data, you would be able to carry out financial analysis of how much money they've been making. So anything to do with that, it just wants to test your understanding of transactional data. And for 3B, the collaboration tools that we can talk about are shared documents, so being able to work on one file together, live chat, so being able to open up message boxes or video call and things like that, and also scheduling, so you could use a scheduling tool to set deadlines and allocate different jobs to different people. For 3C, it says Piccadilly Shoes has created a website to allow customers to buy online. One reason for them to have the website is to increase sales. So other than increase sales, what other two reasons why might they have a website? So remember, for this scenario, previously they were just using their actual stores and telephone orders. So what could they now do that they couldn't previously if they have a website? In a nutshell, what are the advantages of online retail? So what is the benefits of using the online to sell things? Think about it, come up with a reason, and then write a full explanation. You need to do it twice because it says explain two other reasons. So have a go at answering this question. We'll go through the mark scheme in a moment. This is the mark scheme for 3C, for reasons why you might have a website. So anything to do with convenience for customers, so they don't have to travel. Higher profit margin, so in other words, more money made online because you don't have as many bills to pay in terms of the number of stores. And also to try and keep up with competitors, because obviously most competitors will have a website as well. But the most common things people are going to have thought of are that customers don't need to travel anymore. You're opening it up to a wider audience, so there's a larger number of people that will be able to access. And that in turn will lead to more sales and higher profits. So think about what your answers are and whether you've got both marks, whether you've put a legitimate explanation in, and you can mark this question for yourself. Okay, now we're up to 3D, which is the diagram. These diagram questions have been on every official exam paper. So on this particular one, it is talking about a data flow diagram. So that's the first thing you want to check for when you see this question. Before you even read the scenario, just think about switching your mindset to what type of diagram you're going to be creating. So it says draw a top level data flow diagram. Just look for data flow, information flow, or flow chart. Look for those words to identify what type of diagram you've got to draw. Once you've done that, you can get your head into what that diagram usually looks like. So for a data flow diagram, you know that you're going to need to find your entities, and it's actually the easiest diagram that you can get out of all three that you need to draw. There's usually less entities in these questions than with the others. So in this particular case, you just need to start going through finding the actual entities. So look for the people or groups of people or system that is involved and highlight them or underline them. And once you've done that, you should be able to go through the process of drawing the data flow diagram, finding which pieces of data have been or are going to be sent and which direction they're going to be sent in. Take your time, don't start drawing the diagram before you've really thought about it. And once you think you're ready, draw the diagram. Okay, so with the mark scheme, to get 6 marks you've got to use the correct symbols and you've got to show all of the pieces of data and which direction they flow in. The best tip I can give you is to just try and use the actual language that is in the question, and then you can't go far wrong. For example, when it says on the 3rd bullet point, the payment is either approved or rejected, if you use that particular language on the diagram, then you can't really go wrong. So you just have to read through the question, pick out the entities, in this case customer, credit card company, and the system that goes in the middle is the business, Piccadilly Shoes. So the customer goes through Piccadilly Shoes to get to the credit card company and vice versa. Put in all of your objects, draw the arrows and label each arrow with the correct piece of data. So check your diagram, see how close you are to getting it actually correct, whether you've missed off one of the pieces of information or the arrows are going the wrong way or you've put the wrong symbols in, then you need to remove some marks. Now we're on to the final question, question 4. This is the last question where it has a few short answers before going on to the big long exam questions. So question 4 says an online company designs and sells gadgets. The company uses cookies to gather information about visitors who use the website. Describe one way the company could use cookies to help promote its gadgets. If you break this question down and take your time, pick out the keywords. In this case, it is cookies and promote. So how can you use cookies to promote or advertise something? Think about how you would actually use the cookies, how do they actually function, and then try to describe how that specific company could use cookies. They design and sell gadgets. So how can this particular company use cookies? Think about it and write a full written description. (4b) says the company needs to ensure access to all its offices is secure. It uses a fingerprint system to allow access. Describe how a fingerprint system improves security. So this is quite a challenging question because it's 3 marks. To get all 3 marks, you need to really describe in detail how a fingerprint system would work. What is it exactly that makes it so secure? And then you could even give a specific example of how the security would be improved. So take your time on these questions, try to answer them, and we'll go through the mark scheme in a moment. Okay, so this is the mark scheme. It says for 4A, you can talk about using recent browsing or search history, or identifying the user's preferences or keywords that they've been searching for, or you could compare their preferences to their own gadgets. In other words, help to suggest gadgets to the correct people based on their searching history or what they are interested in. Most common answer would be to show them advertisements similar to what they've been searching for. For 4B, this was a difficult question, but when you actually see the mark scheme, it's easy to pick up marks. So most people will say that fingerprints are unique. They will have got that first bullet point. But then if you expand on that and say, well, because the fingerprints are unique to one person, it's more difficult for people to copy them, then that would get you a second mark. You could also get another mark to say that the person needs to be there, to physically be there to get in. You could also say that it can't be forgotten, so people might forget or guess someone else's password. And also you don't need to update them because they will stay there forever. So any of those things, that they can't be copied or that they're unique, anything like that with a full explanation, and you will get your marks. Okay, on to 4C. It says the company wants staff to use digital systems responsibly. Discuss how staff can use digital systems responsibly to help protect the environment. So again, scan through the question. It's a 6-mark question, so it says discuss. It doesn't say the positives, it doesn't say negatives, but it does say protect the environment. So we need to talk about essentially how to protect the environment rather than how it might be damaged. So how can the staff use digital systems responsibly to protect the environment? What can you do using digital systems to try to save energy or to try to not make the environment worse in some way? Have a little think about your answer. Remember, this is a 6-mark question, which means it's mark banded. You essentially need to choose 2 different ways that you could help to protect the environment and explain them in detail. Or you can do 3 different ways and explain them in slightly less detail, and you might still get the 6 marks. Have a little think and answer the question now. So this is the mark scheme. The discussion can include things like storing and communicating digitally, so we're saving the use of paper. So in other words, less trees are being chopped down because we're using things online instead. Computers could be set to use power saving features, so anything to do with screen brightness to save battery life. Any computers that aren't being used, you could turn them off. Make sure all old computers are recycled, or instead of getting new computers, try upgrading the ones that are already there. And if you are getting rid of computers, make sure you get rid of them safely. So most of these things you will have definitely covered in your lessons. All you needed to do was pick 2 or 3 and then make sure that you expand and talk in detail about each. Okay, on to the last question. So this is 4D, 9-mark question, the same in every exam. There's always a 9-mark question at the end. People get really scared, they see the 9-mark question and go, oh, how am I going to do this? It's too hard, there's too much to write. You've got to just break it down into chunks. Imagine it was 3 3-mark questions instead. Look at it that way. So the company wants some staff to work remotely. Working remotely means that they're working from home or from elsewhere other than the office. Assess the impact of remote working on the company and its staff. You must provide a conclusion as to whether or not you think remote working is a good idea. So you're looking to weigh up the good and bad things of working remotely, and you need to talk about the company and the staff. So for this particular one, I would try and make at least 2 points. Maybe focus on benefit and drawback for the company and benefit and drawback for the staff. So what is the benefit for the company of their staff being able to work from home? What is the drawback of the staff working from home? And then for the actual staff themselves, what is the benefit for them? And are there any drawbacks of working from home for the staff? And once you've done that, you could literally just write 1 sentence saying whether you think it's a good idea or not. Everybody's got their own opinions, I think, and some people prefer working from home and some people don't. So it's completely up to you. There is no right or wrong answer. You can say that you don't think it's a good idea. You can say that you do think it's a good idea. It doesn't matter. All that matters is that you think of the benefits and drawbacks and explain them. You don't have to write as much as what you think to get 9 marks. You don't have to write page after page after page. You just need to think about what your points are going to be and take your time to expand on them. I would suggest not even putting pen to paper until you think about the points that you're going to say first. Maybe make a note of the 4 points that you're going to make and then write them out and expand on them. Take an attempt at this question now and we'll look at the marks in a moment. So the company wants some staff to work remotely. Assess the impact of remote working on the company and its staff. You must provide a conclusion as to whether or not you think remote working is a good idea. Here it says that you need to talk about positives, negatives, positives. You can talk about anything in a list, really. I know, notice that it doesn't actually mention negatives for staff, which is a bit strange, but you can definitely do that. So the positives for the organisation, you could talk about the fact that they might need less office space, that people might be able to work better without any distractions in the office. You could talk about having a world team. In other words, you can get staff from anywhere in the world. You could talk about needing less managers. You could talk about people less likely being off sick because they can work from home. Negatives, you could talk about, the infrastructure costing them quite a bit of money, maybe security issues, maybe some staff don't want to work from home, so they might leave, and so on. There's such an endless list, really, of different things that you could talk about. And again, it's up to you whether you want to make it positive or negative. So you just need to make sure that you've done a full description. It's mark banded, so you don't just get a mark for each point that you make. It just needs to have a nice logical flow to your answer, and make sure that you've included quite a few from this list. So that is the end of this exam paper. You need to go through, total up all of your marks, see what you got out of 60, and then you should have a clear kind of overview of what topics you need to focus on now as well.